Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's stream on jsPolicy. I know you might be wondering like why I am not visible on the screen. So that's due to the connectivity issues that I'm facing at the moment, because of which things have been delayed a little as well. But it's okay. We are here, and Lucas and Rich are here. So I'm on a 4G, so we'll try to get it going. So please keep sharing on your in your social networks about this particular stream. We are learning about jsPolicy today, which is very interesting, and we will be learning all about it, what it is, why it came into existence, and some of the cool things that you can do with jsPolicy. Also, if you go to directly like there's a website jspolicy.com which is dedicated to jsPolicy, and you can see a lot of things over there. Just to give you the context, so if you have heard about OPA and Kyverno from my previous streams, so you know what Kubernetes policies are, and how they are, why they are into existence, and why do we need them, and how these particular set of tools they help all these mutating, validating, controlling, and doing all the management stuff on Kubernetes. So with this, also, if you're new to the stream, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, because that's what keeps me going. And I think about 170 subscribers, less than 4K. So I think that's a really good number. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. And with that, you can see like two awesome people on the stream, Lucas and Rich. So they are super cool, super awesome, and super nerdy folks to work with. Great. I had done a stream previously with Lucas on the V clusters, which obviously is amazing. So they are doing pretty rad stuff at Loft. So probably do check out all the awesome projects that they are doing. And out of which today, one of the awesome projects that we'll be discussing is jsPolicy, which is again super interesting. I have done actually on all the domains covering. So we have covered OPA, we have covered the Kyverno, we have covered KubeWarden, and today I'm covering jsPolicy. Also, I'll be talking about jsPolicy and all the other three at Container Days 2021 in September. So make sure you sign up for that particular event. So with that, over to the awesome folks, because anyways I'm not visible on the screen. So, and Lucas, please introduce yourself to the community.
Yeah, Rich, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Hey, folks, I'm Rich. I'm a senior developer advocate at Loft. I've been with the company for, I don't know, like 5 months now, and we're very small, very agile. It's been a lot of fun. We're working on some really cool stuff. This is probably the project of ours that has gotten the least attention, but I think it's super valuable. We definitely heard from people who were struggling with understanding OPA and implementing it, and that's kind of where this came from. So I'll let Lucas do most of the talking today.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for having us on the show. It's fun. Yeah, I remember our session about vCluster when it just came out. I remember you reaching out via Reddit, actually, when I was telling people, hey, we launched this cool project on GitHub. Here's the link, check it out. And you're like, this is awesome. Let's have a call about this next week on YouTube. And that was a lot of fun. So I'm glad you reached out about jsPolicy as well. Yeah, jsPolicy. Oh, by the way, one sentence about me. So, Lucas, CEO of Loft Labs. Been working with Rich for a couple of months now on spreading the word about all the open source projects that we're building, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And jsPolicy, yeah, as Rich said, is kind of our newest baby essentially. We just launched it a while ago. It's a policy engine for Kubernetes, so it allows you to enforce certain guardrails and deny requests and things like that. At the API server level, it allows validating and mutating admission control webhooks, and essentially, is designed as a alternative to Open Policy Agent. And yeah, it's a super exciting project. It's pretty new.
Do you want to?
Awesome. So the first things first, like when you already see there are projects out there, like the OPA is there. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Sorry.
So am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
It might be lagging, but
Mm.
so it's all good. It's coming real time. Cool.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So basically, when you saw all the projects which are out there, like the OPA is there, Everno is there. So how do you feel? Where does JS policy fit in? Like, why the idea of JS policy came?
Yeah. All right. I'll keep going. Yeah, so we were operating it ourselves. I have no like real hands-on experience except for playing around a little bit with Kidano. But to me, the problem was just a certain level of complexity regarding the language that these policies are written in, as well as the complexity of running the policy engine. And a lot of our customers with our commercial product Loft essentially had the same issue, because when you're establishing a self-service system for Kubernetes namespaces, which is what Loft is designed to do, then you need guardrails and you need to put these policies in place to make sure your cluster is always running in a stable mode, always available. You need to essentially restrict users, and our users or our customers are using Open Policy Agent, and there's a lot of there are a lot of pain points in operating it. And I think a lot of that comes down to the complex architecture, as well as the language, right? Rego as a non-Turing complete language that doesn't have like a very mature ecosystem for a programming language. Well, it's not really a programming language; it's more like a declarative authorization language, I guess. And that's the thing that is very, very different for a lot of people to grasp. So we were kind of pondering around with that idea of building something in JavaScript. We were always like wondering, why didn't I just choose JavaScript, right? It's kind of like Nginx. I remember they had this like programmable Nginx with Lua, and I was always wondering, why didn't they choose something more popular, right? I guess when they introduced it, maybe Lua was one of the more popular languages, but it certainly wasn't, like 10 years ago when I was playing around with Nginx and Lua. And yeah, I think recently they actually made the switch to JavaScript. And that was really eye-opening for me, because it apparently seems to work very well, and it seems to be pretty performant for a web server. So why not use it for policies as well? And then Fabian, our CTO, was just really excited about that idea, and he just hacked together on the weekend. Remember, Rich, when we weren't even talking about it in the week before, right? And then the week after, it was there.
I hadn't even heard about it, literally. Like, I heard about it when it was done. It happened so fast. And Fabian is a machine. He's fantastic, such a smart person, and such a great coder. But it's I think that it's interesting in that when we talked about this at the time of the launch, you'd mentioned that you were actually talking with customers who were having difficulty implementing OPA. So it was like they didn't have a policy enforcement in place at all, because they just weren't able to get their heads around Rego. So I think it's so smart to use JavaScript. It's something that is there, so present in the ecosystems. People either know JavaScript or they can learn it pretty easily. There's so many resources out there for how to learn JavaScript. Plus the fact that if you're working on a platform team, even if you're not somebody who does a ton of JavaScript, you probably have some engineers in your company who do, right? So there is knowledge there to leverage. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think like, hiring, sourcing talent in the JavaScript space. I mean, getting engineers is always tough, right? But
Yeah.
I think definitely there are more JavaScript engineers out there than anything else, I guess. And I'm pretty sure that every company has some kind of JavaScript guru. They may be working on front-end stuff rather than Kubernetes policies, but they'll probably be, able to help out in terms of how do we set up this project, how do we set up like a testing framework, that is being run with our CI/CD pipeline, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure every company has experts on that already, which is definitely a big plus. And yeah, you already said that a lot of our customers, they were like at the very early stages exploring different options. And due to the fact that we're kind of operating in pre-production environment, it's more easy for them to, swap out certain things. I think that's really where we're focused on, right? If someone wants to enforce, I guess, policies in their production environment, and they already are running a policy agent, right? I don't see any reason for them to look into jsPolicy if they're happy with what they set up. But if you're in the development space and things are evolving very, very quickly, things need to be adjusted very quickly, and you're super early with policies or haven't even started looking into them, then jsPolicy is definitely one of the viable solutions out there. Again, I think it's pretty interesting, the different approaches, with Rego having like this declarative language approach, and then Kidano with the pure declarative YAML, not even any flexibility regarding language, right? But very, very easy and very, very good understandable, right? I looked at the policies there and I'm like, I get it, It's, for someone who has experience with Kubernetes, it totally makes sense to read policies in Kidano. And then jsPolicy, us, I guess, taking a different stance and just saying like, hey, there you go, JavaScript, you can do whatever.
Yeah.
So
I think that
approach as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important to meet people where they are, and I've worked with a lot of tools that have, declarative DSLs, and I totally understand why people go that route, but it really does, put a lot more burden on the people managing the things, I worked in the Puppet world for, years. I worked there for a while as an SRE, and you'd have these things happen where like a new version of Puppet would come out and there were like breaking changes in the language, and, people, literally didn't upgrade, for years because they just didn't have the time to deal with and manage those things. And so, meeting people where they are, choosing popular tools that people already probably know how to use, I think that's super smart.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Siam is back. I think he commented I'm back, but I can't see you and I can't hear you. So I'm not sure if you're there, wave or... Yes, I can hear you now. There you are.
Cool, you can hear me. I have come to
we
my
can also see you now.
neighbor's
That's
place.
awesome.
Yeah, I've come to my neighbor's place so that I can get the internet connectivity.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You have really nice neighbors.
Interesting. Okay, so sorry, I lost the bit of track. So where are we?
So we were
just pondering.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the impetus for the project, the fact that people have trouble like getting their heads around Rego, and that was
oh dang, there he goes. I feel so sorry.
Lucas,
he's having a really hard time with connectivity today. Oh, there you are. Now I can see you again.
Oh, that was really having a bad day. So I pressed the wrong key. That's why it happened.
Oh, it's live. It's streaming. Things are gonna happen. But yeah, we had just kind of covered like the reason behind the project, and the reason that we chose JavaScript specifically, because it's something that's really ubiquitous that a lot of people already either know or can learn pretty easily.
Interesting. So have we like discussed like what JS policy actually is?
Good point. No, I think just very briefly, right? Yeah, let me explain it in pretty simple words. So when you're running kubectl, or I guess kubectl or whatever request against the Kubernetes API server, which you're probably more on the kubectl side, right?
Yes.
For obvious reasons. Yeah, so essentially, if you have an environment where people have access to Kubernetes in some shape or form, right? Either directly running kubectl commands or having some kind of CI/CD system even deployed to Kubernetes cluster and run kubectl commands. Sometimes you want to forbid certain requests, or you want to at least alter certain requests. And jsPolicy, as well as other admission control, engines or frameworks, allow you to do that. Kubernetes essentially has two stages in these requests, right? It allows you to mutate with admission control, and it allows you to validate requests. When you're mutating requests, that means you're changing a request, right? So think of the YAML file, right? A deployment YAML or something like that, or service YAML, right? You're making changes to the fields. You're adding new fields. You may add a new label or a node selector, or you may strip away certain things, right? You may say, okay, certain security provisions are not allowed, or certain ports are not allowed, right? You may want to strip them away. Or you want to, and that's mutating admission control. Mutating admission control is executed one after another, these policies, right? I actually think the order is not determined in some way, or it's at least not very much spoken about what the order is internally, but they execute it sequentially. And validating admission control is essentially each one of the validating policies checks the request and then can either allow it or deny it. So we can make certain alterations to the requests, right? And then we validate these requests, and all of these validating all of these validating admission control webhooks, they're executed in parallel, because Kubernetes can do that, right? If you have 20 different admission control webhooks that validate your request, and one of them denies, well, it's denied, right? But we can execute them in parallel because they're not making any changes. Mutating admission control, you can only do that sequentially because they make changes, so we need to sequentially apply these changes. And jsPolicy allows you to do that with JavaScript, which makes it different from Kibana, which is basically using a YAML Kubernetes-like definition of what is allowed and what should be changed, and Open Policy Agent, which is essentially using Rego, which is this cloud-of policy language. And we just give you JavaScript as a Turing-complete programming language. And all of these approaches have different advantages and disadvantages, and we're exploring the JavaScript route right now.
I think that it's really important to note how critical admission control is. Like if you're operating Kubernetes clusters in production, you have to be doing this, right? It's not really an option to be using admission control or not. It just fills some of the gaps that aren't there, in the kind of default Kubernetes security posture, and it's really critical to have. So like one of the biggest takeaways that I would have for people watching is, whether you decide that jsPolicy is the tool that you want to use or not, like you have to be using one of these tools, right? Right. So if you want to look at them all and decide which one you want to pick, that's fine. But like if you're running Kubernetes, if you're running Kubernetes in production, you just have to be doing this stuff.
For sure.
Yep, that is very interesting point that Rich brought. Like, I don't know whether you discussed while I was not there. So the importance of Kubernetes policies, why Kubernetes policies are actually very important. So have we discussed that already?
Well, briefly, I would say, yeah. I mean, it really comes down to putting guardrails in place in what is possible in your Kubernetes cluster for, different actors, especially when you're sharing a cluster, right? If you have a system where multiple tenants have access, multiple teams, multiple users, this just becomes so important to ensure that the cluster just doesn't go down, right? Some funky things are happening in there, right? Just a very, very simple example is, if we're talking about production, as you mentioned, Rich, right? Just imagine you would have 20 different microservices, right? And your company has different teams, right? 20 different teams building one microservice each, essentially, right? And they don't even have direct access to Kubernetes, but their CI/CD pipeline essentially runs kubectl apply or Helm install or something like that, right? And let's imagine it's a SaaS product, something like Facebook, right? And you have an ingress controller, and one of these applications defines facebook.com/API should go to the API microservice, right? And then facebook.com/authentication goes to the login page or something like that, right? What happens if someone accidentally reuses one of these routes, right? Like a team messes something up and now two microservices use the same ingress, right? They both think like one is working on, I don't know, some API for developers and someone is working on an API that is for the product, right? And just for the front end use. And it's a different API and both use facebook.com/API. If you don't validate that request when this ingress controller is created or updated, then you leave it up to the ingress controller to do round robin, right? That becomes very surprising if you're clicking in the UI or if you're a developer and you're talking to that API, because each time you get a different response, right? It's terrible. And even worse, you can allow pods to exploit and to get access to the host machine, right?
I was just gonna say
things like that, even worse, right?
Yeah, I think that you can do. I think that preventing container escapes is really one of the big things that people do. Not letting people run privileged containers. Not letting them escape to the file system. All those kinds of things, and these are things that you're just not going to get in Kubernetes by default. So it's important that you have some sort of tool to enforce those policies.
Yeah, especially with pod security policies being deprecated, right? I mean, they'll be removed in, was it next release or so? Or is it already out? But they'll be gone for sure. And, there needs to be a replacement, and policy engines essentially replace that entirely.
So there actually is a KEP for a new thing that's going to replace those that they're working on. Yeah. I
thought they would just leave it up to the policy engines. I haven't kept up to date with that topic.
Yeah, most people, I believe, would go the policy route, like picking one of the engines that suit best, because that's where we are seeing the innovation. That's where tools like tools are keep on innovating. So earlier there was OPA, but now we have OPA, Kyverno, we have KubeWarden, and we have jsPolicy. So this domain is growing. So we can see like the Kubernetes policies, the need for that is already there, and people are moving more and more towards the policy engines, whichever is kind of easier, provides more flexibility, provides more set of features. So I think that's pretty much like everyone would move to, because you never know, like PSP got deprecated and you are using something which again can get deprecated. So I think that's pretty interesting to have. Yes, Kubernetes does provide a solid base for you, but on top of that, definitely some of the policy engine enforcement would definitely be something which people are actually doing, and they, if not, then they are starting or planning to do so. So now we know like what Kubernetes policies, why they are important, what is jsPolicy. It's kind of interesting that it is written in JavaScript, Turing complete language, and it has its own benefits over Kyverno and OPA. Obviously, Kyverno is limited because it's limited to the YAML file, so there are set of limitations on that level. On Rego, it's basically the Rego, which is only policy engine, so you have to learn a specific language only for policies. And jsPolicy then comes with your JavaScript, and you can write that and do. And I see actually, I don't know whether it's already discussed, but I see there's a very good comparison written in the jsPolicy.com that is with respect to OPA and Kyverno. Maybe we can talk about it later, but first brings the like of architecture, like how it actually works with your cluster. So can you pull up the architecture diagram and discuss briefly on that?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen.
Yep.
All right. You able to see it or not
Nope.
yet?
You have to. I don't
Oh,
see
I have
it.
to grant it. Sorry, I have to grant it permission. 1 second.
Yep.
Let me.
You have to grant permission. You have to, I think, re-log in again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, dang. I'll be back in a second.
Yeah. So in the meanwhile, folks, I would say like you have the best people on the screen, Lucas and Rich. So please make sure you ask the questions related to policies, related to JS policy, because now is the time, and the project is new, and it has a vision. So obviously we'll be seeing like how we can use it, how the architecture wise it works. But definitely pitch in your questions as of now, whatever you have. So we have Lucas back very quickly, not
There we
at the
go.
time that I
Wasn't too bad. I was like, dang, this is gonna take a while. Oh wait, let's try it now. I think it's
Yep.
gonna work this time.
There we go.
All right, you're able to see my screen now, right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Perfect, great. Yeah, if we're looking at the documentation of jsPolicy, so essentially we have this, why jsPolicy. I think we also have like an architecture diagram down here with a little bit more details. But essentially, let's take a look at this. I really like this diagram because it helps people understand how policies are executed, not just in jsPolicy, but also kind of in general. Essentially, when a kubectl request comes in at the API server, what a lot of people already know is that it's written to etcd at some point, right? Your deployment or service, etc., is written to etcd, and then it creates some kind of events in Kubernetes that then can be read from other services, right? Kubernetes basically says like, pod started, pod running. Those are all events essentially. But before that happens, you see this is number 3 and 4, right? Before that happens, while the request comes in at the API server, Kubernetes has essentially webhooks, right? In jsPolicy, all of this here is jsPolicy, has a webhook manager, which essentially tells the Kubernetes API server, hey, whenever you have a certain resource that is specified in that policy, right? So you say, my policy is defined for creating and updating pods. Then the webhook manager sees that in your policy definition. Policy definition is just another Kubernetes custom resource, right? It's a YAML definition that you also apply to the Kubernetes API server that also gets stored in etcd, right? And essentially, it tells Kubernetes whenever request comes in that is using a pod and having the operations create or update, please send me that request, right? And what we're doing then is we're executing these policies. We have these preheated V8 JavaScript sandbox environments, kind of like in your browser, actually. Your browser runs the same, like if you're using Google Chrome, you're also using V8, right, in the front end. And it's pushed by Google, right? That project is mainly driven by Google and the folks that work on Google Chrome. So it's a super, super efficient execution engine for JavaScript. We preheat these instances because that makes it even faster. We don't need to stand up a new sandbox, right? We have these preheated instances, and then we run JavaScript code. And this JavaScript code is stored in a jsPolicy bundle. For those of you who are familiar with JavaScript, essentially we're using Webpack to pack a JavaScript. So you have typically JavaScript code, you have a lot of definitions, you're importing a lot of packages, right? And we're creating this highly efficient bundle, which already contains all the dependencies, which is minified, right? Super, super efficient, highly optimized to execute. And that is what actually is executed in this JavaScript engine. And this bundle comes from the jsPolicy definition. That is the resource that you're creating in the cluster where you're defining, hey, when a pod is being created, run this JavaScript code. And there you have dependencies, you have defined variables, you have loops, you have all these kind of abstract things. And the policy compiler compiles that down to this very efficient bundle, which is actually executed by the V8 engine. And then you have policy violations, which are objects that are being generated out of the execution of jsPolicy bundles. So let's say we're denying a request, right? A violation would be created, because that essentially allows you to track what is going on here. And you can also see the request flow here. So when a Kubernetes API server request comes in, first the mutating jsPolicy definitions get executed, right? Sequentially, as I said earlier, because we're changing things, right? So we can't change it all at once, because, for those of you who know databases, right, if two people write the same row, there's always the question, who wins, right? So we need to make sure that happens sequentially. And then validating is the next step. So after the request may have been altered or not by those mutating webhooks, we have a validating stage where all the requests happen in parallel. Then the request is hopefully allowed. If it's denied, it just shows up as an error in your kubectl apply, kubectl create, etc. Command. And if it's successful, it gets written to etcd, and we're creating events. And then there's a very last step, and that's controller policies here. Controller policies are super interesting because jsPolicy is the first policy framework that introduces this kind of policy. And that essentially means we want to do something in response to an event. So imagine it like this. Let's say you want to ensure that each newly created namespace is somehow logged in an external system, or each newly created namespace triggers an API request, right? You cannot do that in mutating and validating admission control hooks, because you don't know, right, if some other validating admission control webhook would deny it, right? So you can't know when possibly to execute that request. Controller policies allow you to just write 2 lines of JavaScript code, make your API server request, and you know that resource has been created. You're reacting to these events after the request has finished. Another use case would be, let's say you want your network to be isolated for all namespaces, and someone creates a new namespace but doesn't create a network policy in that namespace. Because first you have to create the namespace, right? And then inside the namespace, you're creating the network policy. With controller policies, you could, for example, revoke RBAC permissions if that network policy is not there, or you could just create that network policy with your own request out of this controller policy, right? So there's essentially a couple of options that you have with controller policies, which are not possible today and which are pretty interesting to explore as well.
Yep, that is pretty interesting. And so there's one question, like these, obviously it's, I mean, you can take that, Rich or Lucas. So the policies would be defined as YAML or as JavaScript code.
It's JavaScript code within a YAML. So the answer is both. It's not the usual, it depends, it's both. Yeah, do you want us to take a look at one of these policies to just kind of
sure.
understand what they look like?
Yep.
Actually, let me pull up my IDE. That may be even easier. All right, so if we're looking at a policy, in the easiest case, a policy kind of looks like this. It's again kind jsPolicy, right? It's a new CRD, it's a new object that jsPolicy introduces to your Kubernetes cluster called jsPolicy. Just like a pod or deployment is a jsPolicy, right? And it has a metadata, it has a name, right? Because of Kubernetes restrictions that webhooks need to be a fully qualified domain name, you actually need to do, this kind of suffix here for the names of these policies. And then you're specifying which operations should be targeted by this policy, and then you define which resources. Actually, in this case, it's pretty broad because we're saying create when you do whatever, right? So every time you're creating anything, this would be targeted. And then we can also define the scope, like namespace, etc., right? Namespace resources, non-namespace resources, etc. And then we have the request, which essentially we have the JavaScript object here, which defines the actual JavaScript code for that particular policy. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward. We have JavaScript code, and that's again, you see this is like a string inside of inside of the YAML file. But you can also define your JavaScript code in a JavaScript file and then directly generate policies with it. We have a framework called jsPolicy SDK, which allows you to really easily set that up. I can show that in a minute, but this is the easiest kind of like, I just want to play around with it for now, right? Way to do it. Just have the JavaScript code inline as a string within the YAML definition. So this is just telling us multi-line string, and everything that's indented here is JavaScript code. And we have a couple of things available in the global scope of this language. One is, for example, request. With request, we're getting all the information in this JavaScript code about what the user is doing. For example, request.namespace. And we can say if that equals default, then we deny, right? And we just put a statement in there why we're denying it. And the user is actually going to see that in their IDE or in their terminal, or wherever they're running kubectl, or in the logs of their CI/CD pipeline, etc. But again, you could also have separate JavaScript files and then feed them into the YAML files later on, which is typically what you do at a more professional stage.
Cool. So I think that answers your question, Avinash. So basically, we are creating, after installing the jsPolicy components, we are creating the YAML file, and there are two ways that you can do directly in the YAML file. In the JavaScript portion of the spec section, you can define whatever the policy code has to execute on which resource. In this case, it's kind of all on create, but you can definitely, list it down to whatever verb that you want to use on whichever resource which is there. So and another thing is
A lot of
Java.
examples as well, by the way. If you go to the GitHub project, right, there's essentially a folder with examples where you see, by feature, by use case, etc., right? They're pretty complicated things in there, like injecting sidecar containers, or denying specific images for containers and init containers, just to kind of kick things off and tell folks how to do things.
What I love is how readable this stuff is, like I don't really write JavaScript. I haven't written a lot, but when I look at these policies, I can really easily understand, what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, it's pretty neat, and obviously the documentation itself is pretty interesting, because there are a lot of things which are already mentioned in the docs that people can easily follow through. What about this jsPolicy SDK that you were saying, like how people
Yeah,
can
that's
use that?
super interesting. Let me show you that. So essentially, jsPolicy SDK works like this. You have this. It's a project on GitHub as well, right? You can just check it out, and then you're using. It's not something you import as a dependency. It's rather you check out the project and then you're building your dependency. It's kind of like a starter kit, right? One of the advantages of this SDK is it immediately sets up everything regarding TypeScript. And it allows you to use typed versions of everything in your code rather than having to do, JavaScript typically is not typed, right? That's why they created TypeScript as a higher level language. But then you need to compile it down to JavaScript. And that's what we're already doing with these efficient bundles. If you're going into the source code here, you see that there's typically a lib folder for certain shared things, right? Certain shared functions. And then you have a util folder for some small little helper functions. And then you have this policies folder, right? And in that policies folder is where you actually specify your policies one by one here. So let's say we go to maybe a little bit easier one. Let's say we do validate pods, right? And in validate pods, we have 2 files now. In each one of those, we have 2 files. That's kind of what the framework tells you to do. But you can also adjust these things, right? You can just open up the package JSON, or you can open up the TS config, the Webpack config, right? Make adjustments, right? You could rename these folders, restructure them, have a certain hierarchy, right? It's just a starting point for you. And inside validate pods, you now have this policy YAML, but without the JavaScript code, right? You're essentially telling us, hey, we're validating pods here on create and update for the pod resource. Please execute this policy. But we don't have this JavaScript code in here. Instead, we have an index.ts file, which is, you could also have index.js if you want vanilla JavaScript with this framework. That works as well. But let's take a look at the TypeScript code. The great thing about this is, Kubernetes has all these types already specified, right? So if you want to do something with pods, for example, you could just import that package, right? And then you parse there's like request object, right? Which is the actual object that has been sent in your API server request. And you could, in TypeScript, say, parse that as a pod definition. And the good thing is you get things like autocomplete, right? You can type pod dot, and then it shows you metadata spec, right? And then you go metadata, and then it shows you name, namespace, labels, right? It shows you the types of these things. Very easy to write these policies. And then jsPolicy has certain, this policy SDK allows you to use reusable functions. So for example, if we do validate namespace here, we could also define, so let's say you're creating deployments, stateful sets, pods, right? And you want to ensure the same namespace, or you want to deny the default namespace, and you want to deny the kube system namespace, and maybe a couple of other namespaces. You don't want to replicate that JavaScript code, right? You essentially want to use a function which checks for the namespace, right? Whether it's a deployment, or whether it's a stateful set, or whether it's a pod definition. And you could essentially do that. Like if we're going in here, I think this policy is doing that. Oh no, it's not doing the namespaces, but it checks container images as well, right? So we check validate container images here, and we check validate container images here, right? And we're just passing, in this case, the pod spec. And in the other case, we're passing deployment spec, template spec, right? Which is also a pod spec. And then in your shared file here, you have essentially validate images, which would then provide this function, which iterates over all the containers and init containers that this pod spec has. And then it essentially denies a request if it doesn't match a certain, regex, for example, that is not your company's registry. And it's really easy to get started with these policies. You essentially have a couple of commands. You can run npm run compile. And the result of this is, in the wrong folder. Switch to the project. You can run npm run compile, and what this does is it compiles this JavaScript code and all of the dependencies that you specify up here, whether that be internal dependencies or whether that be dependencies externally, right? Some npm.js function that you're using there, right? Any kind of package that you're using. And then the output is here in policies. You see this is like green, so this was not checked in Git yet, but you may want to check it in later to apply it to your cluster via CI/CD. And we can see like our validate pods, this is our policy, and it still does not contain the JavaScript code, because what we're actually giving you is this jsPolicy bundle. We're giving you that highly optimized JavaScript code as this bundle. It's base64 encoded to make it easier to give it to Kubernetes. So it looks a little messy, but this is essentially your JavaScript code in a very, very highly efficient way that your V8 engine is then able to execute.
Awesome. So this is pretty interesting. You can use inline, you can use in this form. You have the SDK for creation of the policies that you wish to create for specific use cases which are not there. I was actually going through the repository. I have already pasted the link for that. So if you all go to the examples folder, So you can see actually a lot of examples which already exist. Even so, there are like by use case, by feature, and the TypeScript policy as well. So there are tons of kind of, yeah. So there are a lot of examples which are actually there that you can actually try out. I actually tried out one, the initial one, so it actually took me around a few seconds to be honest. So because I created, I can actually show you because I'm not lying. I did, I actually did. So I know my net was not working, but it is now. So if you see, I did install the JS policy over here. So this is a Civo Kubernetes cluster. So you can see I exported the kubeconfig file, and this is a 3 node cluster which is there. Simple installation command: helm install JS policy in the JS policy namespace, and it will install. And these are the set of resources that it installs. So there's a deployment, and which is there, and very simple YAML file which is there, which you can see like the client is JS policy, and it's the metadata that tells it will be denying default namespace. So creation of resources within the default namespace. So it just says like any operations which is create, any resource which is create in the default namespace will be a deny kind of operation. So I create something, and it definitely doesn't allow me. It says it cannot be allowed. So basically that's how simple it is to get started with, at least. So to play around with another set of policies that you are seeing on the screen. By the way, if you want to know, the terminal I'm using is WAP, and if anybody needs kind of an invite, I still have, I don't know, 10, maybe 10 invites left. So you can check that out. It's pretty cool terminal. And
yeah, another
yeah,
thing to show you to kind of get started is actually the website itself. We just updated it before this call. We just updated it yesterday because it's JavaScript, right? Your browser can run JavaScript code, right?
yes.
So what we actually did is we implemented this little, it's front-end based, right? So there's no backend for it, no kind of complicated evaluation on some kind of server. You don't need a Kubernetes cluster for it, right? You have all these examples here, like this deny default namespace, for example. And then you have an editor here. If I switch to a different policy, right, there are more complicated examples, like, deny certain labels or by label, add a node selector, right? But let's just take this really easy example. And then you have an example object YAML here, right, which in this case is a pod. And you can say create, delete, or apply, right? kubectl apply this resource. And you can essentially run that in the browser. So if we have this default namespace deny policy, the one that you kind of run in your terminal, and then you provide, you want to create a pod in this default namespace here, you can even run that in the browser and you get the right evaluation. And if we change that to test namespace, that would be allowed, right? It's pretty dope to kind of, get your hands dirty a little bit and just play around with it. It's a lot of fun, actually.
That is really awesome. I mean, that is really, really awesome. So you can just test from the website itself. So it's pretty cool. You don't need anything. You
Yeah.
can just have your policies over here, and you can test out creation of the object, and right in the browser you'll be able to see whether the object is allowed, denied, and stuff like that. So that's,
Yeah, you can even do mutate, right? So if you add like a node selector or something like that, right? Oh wait, this is I saw that typo this morning. Let me fix it real quick. It's a typo in the pod spec. It actually checks the pod spec as well. If you're putting invalid files in here, they're not allowed.
cool.
But if you actually apply this pod here, you see that the node selector gets added, right? So it's pretty dope. It's really easy to figure out, how JS policy works just by example, essentially. Go to the, GitHub project, copy paste some examples in here, modify the deployment or pod or whatever, right? And just, kind of learn how it works. It's a lot of fun.
No, that's really amazing. And this particular comment is actually right, because it is awesome. That's really interesting. And yeah, it's easy to like Rich also said, even if you are not, even if you don't know JavaScript, but it's very easy, very readable from the functions that are defined. It's very readable what it's actually doing, what it is trying to do. So the readability itself is making it easy and not complex, rather, which is a very good thing. And trying out in the browser is the next level game, I believe. So that's a
And I
very
mean,
awesome.
if you think about it, I think a lot of people want to enable their engineers to understand these kinds of things, right? So like somebody working on an application would hopefully like to understand the policies that apply to the running application in their clusters. And again, whether they're a JavaScript expert or not, they're going to be able to read these things and understand it.
Yep. And another right comment, like the site looks clean. That's really amazing. So very
Props to
Thank
our
you.
designer. She's doing an amazing job.
Yes.
awesome. So like I said, like Loft is, they might say that they have a small team, but that's a pretty rad team that they have built out there. So that's pretty cool. So what is the next, like any other feature like you want to showcase, Lucas or Rich? You want to talk about any other cool feature?
Yeah, I think one thing to highlight is, because when you're using, especially when you're using the SDK and you're writing, TypeScript code or even just regular JavaScript code with it, the huge benefit is you have the entire JavaScript ecosystem to you, right? That means you can write integration tests or stuff like that, right? It's very, very easy to test these policies in CI/CD, use any kind of packages on npm.js. And another cool feature is, besides allowing the three types of policy, you can also do things pretty easily, like getting resources out of your cluster. So let's say you have, I think we actually even have such a use case. By feature explains, you can already see like there's lots of features, right? Or if you want to test something with a regex, right, or something like that, super straightforward in JavaScript. It's all there. I think one very interesting thing is, for example, this unique ingress host, which I said earlier, right? Making sure when someone creates an ingress and you want to ensure that the host that someone is using, right, or the entire path and host is unique across your entire cluster, that's a pretty complicated policy because you kind of need to check all the other ingresses in your cluster, right? If you're looking at this policy here in jsPolicy, super short, right? This is like 10 lines of code or so, right? And we have these baked in functions where you can say, give me a list of all ingresses in this Kubernetes cluster, right? You can get any type, you can get pods, deployments, whatever, right? And then you're iterating over these ingresses, and then you just check, right? Is there any host with the same name as the current request host in this ingress that is being created or applied, right? And then you just deny it, right? It's very, very understandable, very straightforward. I mean, yeah, there's some technical sugar around here, right, in JavaScript, but you could write this even easier. It's just very, very powerful with all these features. Yeah, and I think
Lucas,
the next step is really for us. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, do you want to mention the NPM part?
What do you mean with the?
You can distribute the NPM packages.
Oh, yeah. That's another point. If you want to share policies, right, you can actually publish them on npm.js as well, and other people can use them with one line of code. They essentially just import your package, right? So we don't need like a marketplace for policies. npm.js could be the marketplace for policies, right? Because a lot of these policies, like unique host name for your ingresses, I bet there's like 5,000 companies out there who probably want the exact same policy, right? And someone could just write a simple JavaScript function, publish it on npm.js, and someone else could use that function. It's super straightforward.
Or you could share things internally, on your company's private NPM server too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely different teams working in different clusters, but they probably need the same kind of policies. It's easy to share that for sure.
Yeah, I think that's I would say like that's pretty advantageous to JS Policy, because you don't have to create a policy hub. npm is already there, and people can use that. So you have saved a lot of time creating a policy hub for the policy distribution. So that's pretty amazing, and people can reuse the policies and create the new policies. So cool. So do we have any sort of like roadmap which is there, like where the project is actually headed to? What's your take on that? What's the next thing that's coming up, or basically, what is your vision next with this particular project? Like donate into CNCF, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, JS policy is super, super early, right? I mean, if you go into GitHub today, it has like, 40 GitHub stars, right? It's super early. I think this is the first time we're actually publicly speaking about it. So it's super, super brand new. You'll probably see a lot of typos still in the documentation. Please open pull requests if you see one. And there's a lot of things to do. I think we have a pretty complete feature set to kind of get started, just because we're using JavaScript, and a lot of the functionality is just baked in the language essentially. But yeah, I'm definitely sure there will be, the more people that use it, there will be more advanced use cases and more workflow definitions that we need to bake into JS policy. And definitely, I mean, the route that you said regarding contributing this to CNCF, for sure. I mean, I know CNCF filters these projects really rigorously, right? It needs to have some community adoption first, and it needs to have processes first, and needs to be run in production first, right? At a certain level company. I'm pretty sure we're going to get there. And at that point, contributing it to CNCF, for sure, that'd be a really great goal for JS policy.
Yep, I think that's pretty cool, and that's pretty interesting project, interesting vision, and the power is there. So it possesses that particular power to for creating the policies, even the complex policies that you can see on the screen, getting written in such small lines of code. So definitely, give JS policy a star if you like it. So that would be really interesting, and rightly said, since CNCF is the hub for the awesome open source projects, I really see JS policy being there, because I don't think why, I'm not able to think why the community would not adopt. I know like it's in early stages, but definitely it has a big potential, and you have reduce the learning curve already by having everything integrated on the website. So you just, if anybody just directly goes to JS policy, they can try it out there and then itself. So that is another learning curve that you have reduced over the website itself. So I believe, I mean, there's no reason that you should definitely not try it. I will definitely put JS policy in the marketplace, the CO marketplace, and so that at least the CO customers can try that out.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's an awesome idea. That's cool.
Yep. Yeah, we should give some platform so that people can try that out. So I think that should be. Kiverno is already there. We have Gatekeeper, so why not JS policy? So let's have this, hear the community feedback, and definitely there are ways to contribute. So if you are JavaScript folk, you want to contribute policies, you can do that. If you want to contribute to the code, you can do that. I mean, in Golang, you can do that. If you want to contribute the docs side, definitely you can do that, because already the docs are pretty neat, and you can contribute even more to make it even better. So I think a lot of ways for you as a community to contribute. So definitely let's push the awesome, because in the end it's the community who can drive the project, and who can do things. And also, yeah, in this particular project you actually have a great chance for the contributions, because more the number of contributors and maintainers, the better the chance the project of getting admitted to the sandbox stage. So I think as of now it's under loft, so they would be looking for maintainers. So I would say, like, don't miss out this opportunity. Start contributing from scratch, and slowly you can become one of the maintainers. And that would really be amazing once it gets adopted to CNCF sandbox project. It will be really helpful for your overall profile and contributions perspective to cloud native community. So that's pretty interesting. And Anything else, Rich or Lucas, you would like to add?
I would just say that, I would love to personally hear from folks. If you try it out, I'd love to hear your feedback. If you're on Twitter, my handle is there on the screen. I'm at Rich Burrows. We're also in the Kubernetes Slack. So both Lucas and I are in there. If folks want to ping us, would really love to hear about your experiences, good or bad,
Yeah,
For
I mean,
sure. And we're also going to be at KubeCon. So if anyone
Yes.
actually makes it in person, or even if not, right, if you're just attending virtually and you ping us in Slack or whatever possibilities there will be to connect virtually, reach out anytime. We're not going to talk about jsPolicy at KubeCon, but we're going to talk about vCluster, another project. And I hope the event will be a lot of fun. And I hope to see a lot of faces again. It's going to be exciting.
yep. And those of you who are wondering what vCluster is, there is a stream on my channel with Lucas on vCluster, so definitely check that out. That what vCluster is, it and it's actually really powerful, and using a lot of things we discussed, the architecture and all that stuff. So it's pretty dope project. Just like this one, I feel like this has a lot of scope, even with respect to the current projects which are out there, which are matured, which are graduated. Still, the scope is there because uh, there are kind of pros and cons to each project, and this project is having its own set of positives. So, but yes, like Rich mentioned very rightly, the feedback is very important. If there are any gaps, let's shout out in the community and tag them so that they can answer publicly if you are tagging on Twitter. And that's so and Rich is very active on Twitter. Probably, you can definitely tag Rich and Lucas, obviously, and we can definitely see where this project is headed to. So, yep, really interesting. Thank you, Lucas and Rich, for tuning in and explaining about jsPolicy. I did talk about jsPolicy to Rich, like we can discuss. I think it was last month, and Rich said like let's talk next month when we have some more knowledge, some more features and things like that. I said, sure. And here we are. We're discussing the jsPolicy. Yeah, although the initial hiccups were there for the stream and the network, but we quickly improvised and resolved it as soon as possible at my end. So sorry for that, but in the end, we managed to pull this off, which is really cool. And yep, thank you all. This was interesting. So again, if you are seeing, definitely try that out because that is pretty important. And Lucas and Rich, when you see Twitter, you'll be seeing like a few Twitter threads as well. People have been awesome tweeting about jsPolicy and all that. So that is pretty interesting to see. So once you get off the stream, you can just check out all the Twitter threads that people have created, and that's also interesting.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
thanks to the neighbors. Actually, they made
Yeah,
me
for
a cup
sure.
of tea.
Thank you to your neighbor.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Lifesaver.
Thanks so much for having us on. This has been super fun.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you
so
so
much.
much. And
And
have a lot
Lucas,
of fun at the container days. I didn't know you're giving a talk about jsPolicy. That's awesome.
yep, I'll be giving. So I'll be talking about all four, and so why they are there, because that is, people should know what options they have. Then only they can do the POCs. Then only they know the strengths and the weaknesses, and then only they can choose the right solution for their particular challenge. So
Yeah,
That's pretty
funny
cool.
thing, we were working on this at the same time as Keyboard was happening. Like,
Oh yeah.
we both were working on these, kind of at the same time, without knowing about the other project, and because they hadn't launched, and it seems like it's a very cool project too.
yep. Thank you for tuning in. Okay. So thank you all for tuning in on Monday. So we have started with the Learning Monday, and tomorrow is it will also be a very awesome stream with on Fuse ML, which is by Alessandro from SUSE. Yeah, I know you people might be thinking like I know all of the people at SUSE, but yeah, that is somewhat true because Rancher folks and SUSE folks are also doing awesome work with the number of projects that they're working on, the research and development that they are doing. So tomorrow we'll be talking about how to detect pneumonia from the chest X-ray scans using Fuse ML and CO Kubernetes. So that's going to be pretty
Wow.
interesting stream. So do not forget to tune in same time in MPT, and I hope I'll check the internet connection half hour before, and if it doesn't work, then I'll be here, even before So again, thank you so much, Lucas and Rich, for your time and for your patience during the initial few minutes of the stream. And hopefully we'll be keep talking because of the awesome work that you do. I really love that, and definitely I'll try to contribute as much as I can to jsPolicy, and I'll hook that up in the CO Kubernetes marketplace as well.
Thanks to the folks watching and for the questions too.
Thank you, Siam. This was a lot of fun. Bye.
Yep. Thank you all. Bye.